A survivor's accounts of the Depraved Funhouse, the balloon, part I to 4. Let me begin this by saying that I share my story with you all purely by order of my psychiatrists. They labor under this delusion that reaching out to others about everything that happened to me might provide me with some form of catharsis. Personally, I'm more inclined to believe that it's because they know I've not been taking my sleeping pills at lights out. I've tried explaining to them why. I can't stand to see their faces. The nightmares are always the same. They surround me with their pasty, complexion-less faces with bright crimson face paint on their wide-open eyes with no lids and their split-open grins carved from ear to ear. They just stand there, giggling and asking me, "Would you like a balloon?" I suppose that's where my story would truly begin. With that one innocent question. Or rather, the reason that question now haunts me in my sleep. Happy World. Happy World, home of everlasting smiles. That was their tagline. Unfortunately, it was far too fitting for those who weren't lucky enough to ever get out of the place. Those, like my best friend, Derek Cromwell. I still remember those earlier days. I met Derek when I was 12 years old. Me and my folks moved down here to Tennessee from New York after my father lost his job there as a car salesman. I remember back then thinking how quiet it was compared to the urban chaos I'd grown up in previously. I mean, while I wasn't popular among peers or anything, I did have a few buds back at the Big Apple that I wouldn't be able to talk to anymore. As could have been expected, Mom always hit me with the classic "you'll make new friends, honey. Just you wait and see" line every time I protested. In retrospect, she was correct. Only 2 weeks after we moved here, there I was, standing in the Blockbuster Video located only about a mile's walking distance from the new neighborhood I know. Talk about convenience. Right when I ran right into him. He was about 1/4 of a foot taller than me with broad shoulders and jet black hair. "Oh, sorry," I said, hoping to just subtly bail without being noticed. I tried to just backpedal over to where the PlayStation games were. After all, I was there looking for Resident Evil 2 at the time. That's when he spoke up. "Oh shit. Didn't see you there, man." I kinda smiled and just said, "No, a hole here. It's cool." He smirked and went back to staring at the shelves in front of him. "No way. They're in town next month." Confused, I snapped my head in his direction and saw that he was looking at a poster. I walked over and looked at the poster he was looking at, seeing a big-ass red grin staring back at me. Everlasting smiles. "Christ. What's up?" I asked him. "Happy World, dude." I just stared at him, eyebrows cocked in confusion. "You've never heard of Happy World?" He gasped in exaggerated shock, his eyes bulging out of their sockets at me, an image that haunts me every time I hear the word balloon. I just shook my head at him, feeling the overwhelming compulsion to run for the exit. "Hey, sorry man. I'm new here," he piped up, apparently already knowing how I could have possibly lived ignorant of what Happy World was. With all the excitement you'd expect to see from a 13-year-old hopped up on too much caffeine, Derek then spends the next 10 minutes explaining that Happy World was this funhouse attraction that'll open up every once in a blue moon and stays open for about a month or so before randomly closing down and basically vanishing. Naturally, I asked him what he meant by vanishing. For a moment, he just stared at me the way a deer stares at headlights just before it gets ran over. Goddammit. Why did I have to think of that analogy? Too real. Before shrugging his shoulders. "Dunno dude. They're just there one day and about a month later, they're just gone. Building will be closed down and everything. It'll look like no one or nothing was ever there to begin with." He then went on to tell me about the different clowns that would perform tricks and stuff. I just nodded my head as he went on, my attention fixed primarily on the creepy-ass clown face smiling at me on the poster. I remember how it kinda made me shudder looking at it. Thing was, back then, I had no problem with clowns. Hell, every year for spring break, Ma would take me to see Greatest Show on Earth when they came to town. But something about this particular clown poster just didn't sit right. The face had bright red teardrop-shaped designs around the eyes with long red lines connecting to the corners of its cartoonishly wide red lips. The eyes were pitch dark, only 2 tiny white dots in the center giving them any pronunciation. Below the clown face were the words, "Happy World, home of everlasting smiles, coming June 5th. I wonder if he'll actually come out this time." His words finally jolting my focus away from the poster. Who? The amazing Belier. He's their leader. Or at least that's what they tell us. What does he do? Derek looked at me, mirroring my own clueless expression, and shrugged. I dunno. I've never actually seen him. In fact, I don't think anybody has. How do you know he's real? I asked him. Good question. He said with a chuckle. Maybe he's like an animatronic. Like at Chuck E. Cheese. He quipped. This time I laughed. Or maybe he's a ghost. I chimed in, making my eyes go wide open and making fake ghost sounds. Should have said he was the devil himself. That would have been more accurate. He started busting a gut at this. The kid behind the register, an older high school dropout whose face was so gaunt and pasty looking that he might as well have been a ghost himself, told us to quiet down, apparently having disturbed his nap. Sorry man. We'll take it outside, Derek said with a careless grin plastered all over his face. Whatever. The kid behind the register groaned, rolling his eyes before dropping his head back down into his folded arms on the counter, letting his long, black lion's mane hair fall down and cover his folded arms. Yeah. Go back to your paid beauty nap. Jackass. I remember thinking with a smirk. We left the store and started walking down the sidewalk, laughing like the goofball kids we were. He told me some of the theories his friends had about the amazing Belier. Like the one about him having 3 eyes and able to tell your future. And other outlandish ideas like that. We just went on walking and talking like this for about another half hour before I figured I should start heading back home. Hey wait! He exclaimed, putting his hand on my shoulder. What's your name? New kid? Oh. Linus. Linus Davis. I'm Derek. Nice to meet you, Linus. He held out his hand. I told him it was nice to meet him too and shook his hand. You're pretty cool, Linus. I hope we can hang out some more. I grinned and said, me too. Before parting ways and heading home. On the way home, I thought about one thing: happy world. I won't lie. Despite the fact that I was too old to be into that kind of shit, I was intrigued. The next day, I decided to walk to the Blockbuster Video again on the off chance he might frequent the place. I wanted to ask him more about Happy World. Like, were there age restrictions? What were the other clowns like? And so on. Sure enough, there he was along with 2 of his buddies. They didn't seem to notice me, so I was able to listen to the latter half of their conversation about what else. But the creepy clown poster. So are you guys planning on going? Derek asked the kid on his left, a short, lanky boy with curly bright orange hair and glasses. Can't. Folks are out of town for a business trip. The kid winked and nudged Derek's arm before taking a swig of his surge. Hey. Ray's out. What about you? Corey? He asked the kid on his right, a tall, pudgy kid with a brunette mullet wearing a black leather vest over his Danzig t-shirt. I don't know. Don't you think that routine's getting kinda old? What do you mean? Don't you wanna finally see him? The amazing Belier. I don't know. Man. We keep going and we never find him. Got a point, dude. Ray chimed in. I'm honestly kinda wondering if maybe he's just a fad that the clowns shove in our faces to get us to come back. But what about all our stories? Don't you guys wanna finally see if they're true? Derek whined, looking absolutely betrayed. They were cool legends. Man, but maybe we should just leave it at that, cool legends. Corey said. Derek hung his head down dejectedly. Damn. All out of surge. Derek. Can I borrow $1? I watched as Derek sullenly shuffled around in his pockets and hesitantly handed his friend a crumpled up bill. Appreciate it, dude. I'll see you guys tomorrow, Ray said as he headed out the door. Wait up. I'm right behind you. Later, Derek, Corey said as he followed Ray, leaving Derek standing alone in front of the poster. Yeah, see ya around, I guess, I heard him mutter disappointedly. I decided then to try talking to him. Hey man. He lifted his head to see me, his face now regaining some of its lost optimism. Oh hey. Dude. I didn't know you were here. Oh. I just got here a minute ago. I lied. I wanted to talk to you more about Happy World actually. Ha. Figures, I was just talking to my buds about going in 3 weeks. He said as he pointed to the poster, chuckling at the irony. They both flaked on me though. And to think, after all the times we spent wondering about the mysteries. Derek let out a dejected sigh. Why don't I go with you? The words jumped from my mouth before I even realized what I'd said. Derek's eyes went wide. I could see the excitement mold into his face. Why, you mean it? For a moment, I stayed quiet, thinking, did I mean it? Well, yeah. Why not? I said with a careless smirk, shrugging my shoulders. I've got nothing better to do. And I'm curious to see what the amazing Belier is like. They used to tell me all the time that curiosity killed the cat. I wish I'd listened because common sense wouldn't bring my ignorant ass back. Derek's face blasted the biggest smile I'd ever seen and shouted, hell yeah. Up top. Holding his hand up to gesture a high five. I smiled and returned the high five, the loud clap resonating so loud that it woke the kid behind the counter again. We walked home together that day, sharing more outlandish theories about Happy World and its mysterious ringmaster. When we got to my house, my mom was on the porch watering her daisies. There you are, Linus. Go wash up. It's almost supper time. She looked over to Derek. Who's this? Before I could do or say anything, Derek piped up, Derek Cromwell. Nice to meet you, ma'am. He thrusted his arm outward to shake her hand. Such a gentleman. It's nice to meet you, too, Derek. Mom chuckled as she shook his hand. Well, I'd better head home before my folks get worried, he said, holding up his hand to me for a high five. Tomorrow. Same time. Same place. I returned his high five, going in for a hug, and replied with, you bet your ass. Language. Mom scolded. I gave her the stereotypical oopsie daisy smile and equally awkward as hell chuckle. She just smirked amusedly and rolled her eyes, telling me to head inside and get ready for supper. I still remember it was homemade calzone night. My favorite. I miss Ma's homemade calzones. They don't have anything like that in the cafeteria here at the Wacky Shack. See you later, dude, I shouted to him as I went inside. At dinner, I decided to ask my folks if they knew anything about Happy World. I don't believe I saw anything about that when I scouted the area, Dad said with a ponderous expression on his face before taking a huge bite out of his calzone, some of the cheese and sauce hanging off of his lips. Ma's calzones were the best, extra gooey cheese and overloaded with marinara. As he wiped his mouth with his napkin, he chuckled and said, then again, I didn't exactly pick this area based its tourist attractions. Mom smiled at the joke and sipped her drink. Well, there's a poster for it at the Blockbuster where I hung out with Derek, and he says it's this cool fun house that's coming to town in 3 weeks, and I thought it'd be fun to check it out. He says it disappears randomly and there's a mysterious clown nobody's ever seen before. Dad paused for a minute before saying, that sounds cool and all, son, but we have to keep an eye on our money. And I'm almost willing to bet it ain't cheap to get in. My heart dropped in all my excitement. I didn't even bother asking Derek about the price of admission. My head slumped down pitifully, wanting to plead my case, but realizing that to be a futile effort. That's when Ma, wearing that sly grin all mothers have when they've concocted an idea, piped up, I know. Why don't you go around the neighborhood tomorrow and see if any of the neighbors would be willing to kick you a few bucks for some manual labor? I looked up at Dad, who nodded over to Ma and shrugged his shoulders. In all honesty, it didn't seem like a half bad idea to me. Yeah, I guess it couldn't hurt, I replied nonchalantly, shrugging my shoulders to try and play it cool, despite the fact that I was just happy to have a plausible suggestion. Sleep on it, Ma said with a wink, silently calling bullshit on my obvious facade. Of course, I'd already made up my mind before going to sleep that night, whatever it took. I was gonna earn the money to get into Happy World. Little did I know that the true price was blood, not cash. Early the next morning, I quickly jumped out of bed, got dressed, grabbed a blueberry Pop-Tart, and headed out to look for work. It went like that for the next 3 weeks. Exact routine: wake up, throw clothes on, scarf down Pop-Tart, go cut grass or clean gutters till sundown and collect pay, head home, eat supper, and finally hit the sack for the night, rinse and repeat. I was a little bummed that I couldn't spend time with Derek, but I knew it'd be damn well worth it when me and him could finally go to Happy World together and be the first to see the amazing Belier. I wish to God more than anything that I could have those 3 weeks back. By the time June 5th rolled around, I'd managed to accrue $350 in cash, which might as well have been a fortune to my adolescent mind. Surely this would be enough, I told myself, looking at the fat bundle of bills in my hands. I remember being so excited that morning that as soon as my eyes opened, I bounded out of my room and down the stairs to wake up my parents. Ma, Dad, Wake up. I remember shouting at them. Shaking them until they stirred awake. Groaning. What time is it? Dad whined, shielding his eyes from the early morning sunlight from the window. Linus. Honey. It's too early. I just stood there looking at her with pleading eyes, unable to contain my excitement. All right, go on and get dressed, she said with a warm smile, despite the fact that she was still half asleep. Duckin' A, I shouted, forgetting that my parents were still present. Language. Ma groaned reprimandingly. Right. Sorry. I apologized with that all too familiar awkward-ass chuckle. Ma just smirked again, rolling her eyes before telling me, go on. Have fun, be safe. I love you. But I was already bounding out of their room and into mine. I should have said I love you, too. Wherever she is now. I hope she knows that I love her and miss her. So much I threw on a t-shirt and jeans before making a pit stop to the kitchen for a Pop-Tart on the go. I thought for a moment and decided to grab a second pack for Derek. It would be his last meal. Before sprinting out of the front door and up to the Blockbuster hoping I'd meet Derek there. Where've you been? Derek exclaimed as soon as he saw me. Sure enough. He was there standing outside of the Blockbuster video. Hey. Listen man. I'm sorry we couldn't hang out. I've been busy trying to earn money for Happy World. He just smiled and pulled me into a giant bear hug. I returned with a bear hug of my own as he said, heck. None of that matters now. I'm just happy you made it. Just then, this girl who looked around my age came walking out of the Blockbuster. She had long, jet black hair, just like Derek's, and was wearing a green and white striped halter top with low-cut jean shorts. I remember looking into her oceanic blue eyes and instantly starting to blush. Damn. She's hot. I remember thinking to myself, as she strutted over to Derek, her hips swaying with every step. So, you ready to go or what? She asked Derek, not seeming to have noticed me. Yeah. But first. Derek then looked at me and said, Linus. This is my younger sister, Liza. She looked at me and the left corner of her lip parted upward into a sly grin. Like she knew I was crushing on her. Hey, I'm Linus. I said, trying not to make it quite so obvious. And failing. She snickered, even letting out a little pig snort that I thought was adorable. Before replying with Liza, this Dork Lord's sister. That made me laugh, and Derek, with that careless grin I'll always remember him for, or at least fondly remember him for, just rolled his eyes and retorted with, yeah. Okay, chowderhead. Laugh it up. Now, what say we hit up Happy World? Hell yeah. I shouted as me and Derek went in for a high five. Oh. I almost forgot. I said, pulling out the pack of Pop-Tarts I'd reserved for him. I didn't know if you'd eaten already. So I brought you a pack. He took the pack of Pop-Tarts and his smile went from laid back to excited. Like I'd just given him $100. Awesome. Dude. I duck in love. Blueberry. Derek exclaimed. Great minds think alike. I suppose. I said with a shrug. See. Chowderhead. He's got good taste. He remarked to Liza. With a sarcastic smirk. She rolled her eyes and snickered before playfully telling Derek to shut up. Me and Derek just grinned as he piped up, shouting Happy World. Here we come. As we started making our way to the proclaimed home of everlasting smiles. So where is Happy World? Anyway? I asked Derek about an hour into the walk. As if by fate or an omen. There we were face to face with the entrance. I was a bit unnerved when I saw that it resembled a lot of the poster that advertised it, a gigantic pasty white face with large red lips stretched from ear to ear. A red painted nose. As well as fuzzy orange hair and two enlarged, pitch black eyes with only two tiny white dots in the center of them. I remember my knees actually starting to shake when I looked into the eyes. They were that much more deranged up close, like they weren't even human, like they were the devil's. I looked up to see a bright, red archway forming the words Happy World that connected with the two gigantic red eyebrows. Welcome to Happy World. Derek proclaimed as he placed a hand on my shoulder, startling me out of my anxious stupor. Oh. Yeah. Looks awesome, dude. I bluffed in a botched attempt to mask my anxiety. Where is everybody? I asked Derek, suddenly noticing a distinct lack of other patrons outside of the three of us. Shouldn't there be some kind of a line? I remember asking myself. Maybe we're early? Liza chimed in, shrugging her shoulders. Rock on. That means first in line for everything. Derek cheered. Despite the, albeit lax, allure of not having to wait in line for anything, I was hesitant. Hey man, I'm not so sure we should. But they just kept walking. You comin'? Derek called out to me. Still not seeming to notice my increasing apprehension. Something's not right here, I thought to myself. Standing frozen as the behemoth clown's abyssal eyes firmly fixed me in their dead gaze, I could have turned back. The longer I stared at the structure, the more I began to notice the shadow's menacing pronunciation around the eyes. I wasn't feeling right at all about this anymore, and despite the disappointment I knew Derek would feel if I ran out on him, I just couldn't. You okay, dude? You look like you're staring at a ghost. Derek called out to me, now just 3 feet away from the clown structure's giant red lips. I broke from my staring contest with the clown structure and saw him and Liza standing there, looking confused. Oh, why yeah, sorry, I stammered, failing once again to conceal the chilling anxiety that was working its way up my spine and into my voice. It's not too late, you know, I thought to myself. Just tell him that you hear Ma calling. Hey, I got no further before I was startled by the sound of creaking metal. The 2 tiny white specks inside of the clown's eyes were now glowing. The bottom jaw of the clown began to lower, distending until its mouth was wide open to reveal the entrance. Once the gaping maw was opened fully, I heard a buzzing whereas I watched a giant pink tongue eject from the inside. A deep, jovial voice then blasted from the entrance, welcome to Happy World, home of everlasting smiles. Before blasting some sort of vintage carnival music that sounded a lot like whoever recorded it did so from their grandmother's record player that was on its last legs. What were you gonna say, Linus? Derek called to me. I looked at him. I could have turned back. I saw the excitement on his face. And nothing. Everything's fine, I lied, putting on a weak smile. Let's go in. Why didn't I tell him? That's what I'm talking about, Derek exclaimed, putting his hand up for a high five. Keeping my smiling facade, I returned Derek's high five as we stepped on the giant tongue sticking out of the clown's mouth. I felt another pricking chill crawl up my spine as the buzzing were sounded again, causing the tongue to retract back into the mouth, followed by the bottom jaw raising up to meet the upper half, sealing the entrance behind us and trapping us inside of its dark entry corridor. For about 5 minutes, we just stood there in the dark. I couldn't see Derek or Liza, who should have been only inches away from me on my left and right. Derek, is that you? I asked as my hands grazed what felt like someone's shoulder. Before he could answer, my heart hammered in my chest as the deep, jovial voice from before boomed from all around us, welcome to Happy World. Are you ready to smile? Hell yeah, Derek shouted from my right. Liza whooped and cheered from my left. I just stood in the middle, too jarred by the unpleasant mix of sensory deprivation as well as at the same time sensory overload to give any response. All at once, lights blinked on to illuminate a long hallway. On each side, there were 2 doors, each decorated with a clown face. 2 of them were female while the others were male, all decorated with the same matching red face paint. So, what do we do now? I asked, my stomach still churning with perpetual anxiety. Now, we go through each room to find the box containing the clown in each room, Derek replied as he began to reach for one of the doors to open. Supposedly, the amazing Belier will be in one of them as well, and we're gonna be the first to find him. Wait, Liza piped up before Derek could turn the knob of the door. We gotta do this door first. I looked over to see her standing in front of a door with one of the female clowns labeling it. You always want to do Happy Franny's door first, Derek rebutted. Why don't we change it up a bit? Liza frowned and opened her mouth to protest, but was cut off by Derek. Think about it. Maybe the reason we never found him is because we start in the wrong place. You know. Liza stood in front of the door with her arms folded in annoyance. Tell you what. How about we split up? I offered, mostly just trying to get moving again. Me and Derek can do this one, and you can do that one. We'll meet back up in the middle. Liza rolled her eyes and said whatever, with an exasperated sigh of annoyance. Hell yeah, you and me, bro, Derek exclaimed, putting his hand up for a high five. I heard Liza whisper dorks, as I, still trying not to let on that I wasn't feeling right about Happy World anymore, attempted to return the high five as reassuringly as I could. It was our last high five. Have fun. I muttered rather weakly. Which was then immediately followed with Derek teasing her saying yeah. Have fun. Chowderhead. Liza stuck out her tongue and gave Derek the finger, to which Derek shot back with 2 duck yous of his own, forming his face into an expression of exaggerated surprise and retorted sit on M and spin. I couldn't help but actually snicker at this, both out of amusement and as a last-ditch effort to try and void the anxiety from my thoughts. Finally, she turned the knob of the Happy Franny door. I'm willing to swear on my life, though, that before she opened the door she turned around and winked at me, smiling. Once Liza disappeared into the room, Derek turned to me, grabbing the knob. You ready, dude? Yeah. I replied, feeling a bit of the nervousness washed away. Just a bit. With a huge, excited grin, Derek said on 3-1. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's just a clown. Right? I told myself. The image of the creepy red clown face from the poster assaulting my mind. 2. Derek said. The clown won't hurt me, right? The huge, dark marble eyes with the 2 tiny glowing white dots in their center and the giant gaping red maw of the structure burrowed itself into my mind, the shadows further accentuating its ominous visage. I was imagining that I was being swallowed whole by the funhouse. Maybe it's not too late to turn ba. 3. Derek shouted as he threw the door open in excitement, ending my thought dead in its tracks. Inside the room was dark like in the entrance, save for these dark orange LED lights peppering small areas. Quickly, yet hesitantly, I stepped inside, Derek following close behind. The door slammed itself shut with a thud, making my heart pound that much harder in my chest. For a drawn-out momentum we just stood there, consumed in an all-encompassing darkness that was only penetrated by the 3 dimly shaded orange spotlights hanging side by side in front of us. After a few seconds, my eyes adjusted to the darkness enough to make out the shapes of doors under each of the 3 spotlights. One of them had a yellow frowny face ornament hanging on the front, while another was decorated with a smiling face. The last door had a more abstract expression, 2 X shapes for the eyes and an O-shaped mouth. I had no time to ponder what the doors led to, however, before the booming voice rang out again. Welcome. Before you are 3 doors, one leads to a dead end. A vintage-sounding recording of disappointed groans played out. Another door will lead you into a maze to find our special friend Happy Jack O. This time, it was the sound of children cheering that echoed from all around. The last door leads to a special secret surprise, anyone bold enough to enter. This was followed by a crowd of exaggerated oohs and surprised gasps. Secret surprise? I wondered before the voice boomed out, good luck and, most importantly, remember to smile. Followed by the disjointed carnival music from before. Follow me, Derek said as we approached the door in the middle with the smiley face. Before I knew it, I was following Derek to the smiley face door. Before he could even grab the knob to open the door, I piped up, wait. What's up? He asked, staring puzzled at me with his hand still reaching for the knob of the smiley face door. My mind was racing between the nauseating senses of paranoia and dread that this godforsaken place continued to assault me with, and the possibilities of what the secret surprise was. Let's try this door first, I suggested, pointing to the door with the shocked expression hanging on the front. Whatever the secret is, this is the door it would be behind. Right? I reasoned to myself as I told Derek that that's the door where we may have the strongest possibility of finding the amazing Belier. For a second Derek stood there, pondering my suggestion. Maybe we should split up too. You take that door, and I'll take this one. This time, I was the one weighing options. Did I really want to do this alone? What about Derek? Was I really gonna make him do this alone? Before I could actually voice any of these thoughts, however, Derek was already in the act of opening the smiley face door. I watched Derek close the door behind him and disappear into the room. Why didn't I follow him? Why couldn't I have gone through that door? I'm so sorry, Derek. For a moment that felt just shy of an eternity, I just stood there in front of the door, my body quivering like somebody shoved a ducking time bomb down my throat. What are you afraid of? I wondered, trying to rid myself of the cold dread that had burrowed its way back into my head with twice its original magnitude. This was what you wanted, right? What you were looking forward to, the chance to be the first to see the amazing Belier in the flesh. As I began to reach for the door, Hands shaking uncontrollably, I closed my eyes and began muttering out loud, "There's nothing to be afraid of," over and over like it was a mantra. My eyes shot open immediately upon grabbing the doorknob, jerking my hand back when I felt something slick and wet. "What the hell?" I remember thinking as I held my hand up to the dim, dark orange shade illuminating the door overhead. My eyes went wide at seeing the dark red stain covering my hand. At first, I was a bit confused and my mind started running through questions. What the duck is this stuff? Is it paint? Before long, however, another possibility slipped into the forefront of my mind. A much more sinister possibility. Is it blood? I felt my entire body go limp in utter dread as I looked back at the door, now noticing that not only was the knob stained with red, but the door itself was scattered with dark splotches all across the front, haphazardly like the splattering of blood. I closed my eyes and tried shaking the thought from my mind. There's nothing to be afraid of. Stop being a duck and chicken. Even as I told myself this, however, the image of the creepy clown poster crashed its way back into my mind. I felt those dead, marble eyes boring into me, staring into my very soul, the wide split grin taunting me. I then envisioned the dark red makeup starting to melt and smear across the rest of the pasty white face, like blood. This introduced a new thought to me. Is that why all the makeup is red? Is it blood? Despite the frightening imagery invading my mind, I still felt compelled to open the door. Nothing behind this door will. Who? The thought died abruptly when I heard what sounded like someone crying in the distance. It was quiet, and I almost didn't even notice it. That was until I pressed my ear to the door and heard the crying get louder, sounding tortured. Is someone hurt in there? Despite the mounting dread building inside me, I found myself, albeit unconsciously, turning the knob of the door and walking inside. Instantly, I was blinded by the fluorescent lighting of the room, forcing me to squint my eyes nearly completely shut. Next, my sense of smell was assaulted by a foul miasma of rotted meat. My eyes watered and I had to hold my breath to keep from emptying my stomach completely. I kept pressing forward, hearing the crying get louder. As I went, my eyes now able to adjust a bit to the harsh lighting, I saw that the room was a long, white corridor with big, brown wooden crates lined against the walls, one on each wall. One of them was labeled with the classic yellow smiley face, but the other instead bore the creepy red smile from the poster. Just then, the loud voice boomed over the speaker again. "Welcome to the secret passage." I was once again jarred by the sudden boom of the voice, derailing my train of thought. "2 boxes sit in front of you." A recording of exaggerated gasps, the kind you'd hear on those old-timey game shows from the 50s, played before the voice continued. "Inside the boxes, you'll find a secret tunnel. One will lead you to the balloon room." This time, it was a recording of children cheering. "The other leads down the garbage chute." This was followed by a cartoonish sounding foghorn blaring. "Garbage chute, so that's where the awful smell is coming from," I thought to myself as the voice continued to tell me that I had 30 seconds to choose one of the passages. That's when a new voice came over the speaker. A younger voice. I. The voice was stuttering, quivering like they were going to break into tears any second. There was a loud bang sound, like someone had slammed something down. Then the younger voice came back, his voice shaking and in absolute hysterics. I here th the AA asked me anything amazing Beely or likes tea to hang out in the balloon room. I heard that too. You think our friend will find him? The deep, jovial voice said with the obviously fake surprise gasp you hear from all birthday clowns when they try to make something sound exciting. For a second, all I heard was the young voice whimpering, "I don't want to do this. I want to go home." Before there was another thud sound. This time, I was sure I could hear a crunch sound too, like crushing bones, which was followed immediately by the younger voice letting out a shrill cry of pain. "What the duck?" I muttered aloud, unable to contain the terrified panic building up in me. "I said," the jovial voice barked, now sounding far more aggressive. "You think our friend will be able to find him?" The young voice just kept crying that they wanted to go home. What the hell is going on? I wondered as I looked at my red-stained hand again, color draining from my face as the horrific revelation slowly became more and more clear to me. It looks like someone needs a visit to the balloon room themselves. I heard the kid's voice start bawling, begging and pleading for dear life as it trailed further away from the mic. After that, It was silent again. I just stood there panicking. A million thoughts swarming my head like a horde of pissed off wasps. What do I do? I stood wondering. Who was that over the speakers? Why did they sound so afraid? What were they doing to him? This line of questioning continued as I thought about the kid's begs and pleas when the other voice mentioned him going to the balloon room. That was when a new, far more sinister question rammed to the forefront of my thoughts, forcing my blood to freeze over what's in the balloon room. Before I was able to further consider the possible horrors that were in the balloon room. However, I heard what sounded like sandpaper being dragged across metal. The eardrum-shattering screech forced me to cover my ears as tightly as humanly possible, wincing in pain reflexively. When I opened my eyes, I saw that the long alabaster corridor looked smaller than before, more compacted. The screech continued and I watched the wall at the far end of the corridor push forward towards me. I began to step back as I watched the two walls begin to push towards each other. When I felt the wall behind me begin to push against me, forcing me forward, I began to panic. The true terror of the situation sinking further in with every inch the walls of the white corridor shifted towards the center. The walls are closing in. In my immediate panic, I grabbed the knob of the door behind me. I jerked with all of my strength. To no avail, the door wouldn't budge. I was pushed back towards the center of the room as the entrance wall continued its advance. That's when I began to make out the sound of a faint, tinkling tune. The more I listened, I realized that it was Pop Goes the Weasel. I stood in the center, scrambling in a petrified frenzy to think of a way out of the corridor. I looked to the two crates at my right and left. One leads to the balloon room, and the other leads down the garbage chute. The jovial voice mentally reminded me as I began exchanging glances between the two crates. Which one am I supposed to go through? I frantically asked myself. The walls to my left and right were now only about 3 feet apart from each other. I looked at the one with the red smile and began to attempt opening it. The next few moments felt like time had slowed down, every second feeling drawn out just to tease me. I started prying at the crate with all of my strength, made even more arduous because of the wall's advancement pushing me away from the crate. Each time I was pushed away from the approaching wall in front of me, I'd stumble back only to basically ricochet off of the wall behind me, continuing to close in for the kill. I felt my arms begin to get weak after about the 5th unsuccessful attempt of prying the crate open, my fingertips feeling like they were seconds away from being ripped off the ends of my fingers. By then, there was only about 1.5 feet between each wall. As I kept feebly trying to pry the crate open, tears filled my eyes with the thoughts of being crushed and compacted into a human garbage cube. I began to feel the crate from the wall behind me press against my back. I looked up again and saw that both the entrance wall and the rear wall now only had barely a foot of clearance between each other. I felt the crate continue to push me forward from the advancing wall behind me into the approaching wall in front of me, now only about 5 inches apart from each other. That was when, amidst the panic-induced terror consuming my thoughts, an idea quickly molded itself into my head. I knew that, before too much longer, the walls would eventually bring the two crates together, crushing them both. I thought of the way that the top of a drink can would burst open if enough force was applied to the rest of the can. If I can just get the lid off, I told myself as I climbed on top of the crate behind me. Now with no available clearance left in any direction, I knew I'd have to be careful to only let it compress the crate enough to pop the top loose, just enough to reveal the supposed passageway inside for me to slip through before I'm crushed. When the two crates finally met, I heard a loud whir as the walls attempted to continue their menacing advancement. Now temporarily stalled by the two wooden crates, the corridor was now only barely a fraction of its original length and width. I couldn't even extend my arms in either direction without feeling one of the 4 walls around me. I could actually feel the extra effort it took for me to even properly breathe. Come on, just a little bit more, I muttered as I watched the two crates press further and further into each other. My face drenched in sweat and tears and my heart thundering in my chest. I found my lucky break when I heard the distinct sound of the wood crunching and the pop of the nails being forced loose. Immediately, I reached over and forced off the lid of the crate in front of me to reveal a round hole in the center of it that had one of those dark tube slides, like what you'd find in a jungle gym, attached to it. As the walls began to regain their former speed, I all but hurled myself headfirst into the tube slide. I had to hold my breath as I went down the tube slide, as the horrid stench from before returned with even more potency. This must be the one for the garbage chute. I realized as I tried once again to empty my stomach as I went down the tube. I continued to slide down the darkened tube until I was eventually ejected out and into what I presumed to be the garbage chute. I fell out of the slide. Bracing for impact against a cold, hard floor, I was slightly surprised. However, when I landed on something soft, for at least a good 10 minutes or so, I just laid there as the terrified adrenaline began to wear off, leaving both my body and mind just completely drained. As my heart rate slowly returned to normal, my eyes began to register the surrounding environment. By this point, despite it being strongest in this new room, I somehow managed to adapt to the offensive carrion odor to the point that it had no effect on me anymore. The room was almost without light. Completely. Save for a faint glow in the center of the room. I sat up, feeling something soft underneath my hands, something smooth, yet cold and clammy. What the hell is this? I wondered, unable to see what I was now sitting on top of. It felt familiar in how smooth and malleable the thing beneath me seemed, yet odd at the same time at how cold and stiff it felt. I felt around as I began to bring myself to my feet, still feeling much of the same sensations as before. Once I managed to fully stand, I began making my way towards the faint, orangish red glow in the center of the room, stumbling with almost every step of the way, with the ground seeming to be uneven and shifting beneath my feet. About midway to the center of the room, something snagged my right foot and my balance faltered, causing me to trip and fall on my face into the illuminated radius. After quickly recovering to my feet, I saw that the glow was coming from two long white candles that sat in slender silver holders sitting on top of this long black marble slab. Facing me on the other side of the slab was a large painted portrait of a man clad in a gray, hooded robe. The man's face was a ghostly white with long black shoulder-length hair and black painted lips that split into an unnatural and sinister smile that stretched from one side of his face to the other in a long, thin black goat-looking beard. Even more disturbing, however, were the large, black inverted cross designs painted around his eyes. As I felt across the slab, I noticed indentations in the surface. I grabbed one of the candles and held it close to the indentations, making out the carving of a five-pointed star forming what looked to be the head of a goat. Below the symbol were the words "Praise Belia" carved into the slab's smooth surface. What the duck is this place? I remember thinking, as while I was never raised religious, I did grow up watching enough of the classic Hammer films to know what a satanic altar looked like. Thoughts came rushing through my head, trying to connect the dots to form a horrific picture. I began to back away from the altar, candle still in hand, when I misstepped, falling backwards. I rolled over and held up the candle to see what had tripped me, and I screamed. There, staring at me with two milky white spheres rolled all the way back, was the mutilated face of a young boy who couldn't have been any older than me at the time. With the candle's warm glow, I saw that the boy's eyelids had been forcefully removed, having torn away most of the skin around the sockets as well, leaving his eyes to just sit there in two bloody, exposed sockets. Instantly, my mind reeled back to the image of the poster, the bright, dark red circles around two dead eyes. That image was made even more haunting when I saw that the boy's lips had been ripped clean off of his face, completely exposing the inside of his mouth from one end to the other, parting upwards at the cheeks to form a demented smile. As I moved the light away from the dead boy's face to illuminate other areas of the room, I saw that there were more bodies everywhere. Hundreds or thousands of horrifically scarred bodies. All of them kids. All with their eyelids and mouths torn, carved into ghoulish smiles. Some of them looked even younger than the one I tripped over, and looked to be further decayed than others. It was at this point that I just couldn't take it anymore, and I doubled over and vomited. Once I had emptied the contents of my stomach until there were only dry heaves, I just sat there crying, wanting to just go home. It was then that I heard the sound of a door opening. I looked over to see an open doorway silhouetting four figures. Three of them were adults by their height, and the last was shorter. A kid? Thinking quickly, hid myself by burying myself underneath a few of the nearby corpses, leaving a small opening that was just big enough for me to peek out without being noticed. I heard the kid struggling. "Please, just let me go. I won't tell anyone. I swear to ducking God," the kid cried, his voice sounding all too familiar to me, though my mind didn't want to admit already knowing exactly whose voice it was. Oh, somebody's got a foul mouth. A deep, jovial voice, the same deep, Jovial voice from earlier shouted before bursting into a fit of demented giggling. Another. Hyper-jovial voice. This one more high-pitched and jittery. Replied with, well, you know what that means. Don't you? Happy Bob. The other just kept giggling insanely and I heard the kid wail out in pain. That's when another voice spoke up. This one inhumanly deep and imposing. Enough. Brother Jack O. Deliver the child to the altar. I saw the silhouettes of the figures approach the slab. The kid thrashing and wailing as they dragged him along. My eyes widened in dread as I saw. Illuminated in the candle's glow. Was the clown from the painting complete? With the inverted crosses around his eyes. He was wearing a black and white striped hat with two curved horns that curled back like the horns of a goat. Soon after, the other two joined at the altar, forcing the kid onto the slab. Despite the limited illumination, the sinister display before me was clear enough for me to see from where I was hiding. Standing at either end of the slab were two clowns. The one on the left-hand side was a scrawny clown in a yellow suit with a crude smile stitched into it and wearing a weird black and yellow striped hat with two ends that hung down to the left side of his head, bearing a smiley face and a frowny face ball attached to the ends. While the clown on the right was more heavy-set with a round face, wearing a black and white dual-colored suit and had a sailor's hat with a sad face on it, both with the same albino face paint and by now all too familiar red face paint designs around their eyes and mouths. The leader was standing in the middle, facing forward in my direction from the other side of the slab. My heart nearly stopped dead. However, when I saw that, my unspoken dreaded fear was realized when I saw that the kid struggling on the slab was Derek. No. 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 This isn't about to happen. Is it? Knowing damn well exactly what they planned to do to him. I could see him struggling as hard as he could. But it was no use against the iron vice grips the clowns had on his arms and legs, restraining him to the slab. Who are you people? Why are you doing this? Please. Just let me go. The longer I watched this morbid act unfold, the more I could see Derek's petrified and bludgeoned face. What have they done to him? My mind began to cycle back to earlier in the white corridor, hearing the sounds of snapping bone and the wail of agony that followed. Now the full horror of that situation was revealed. Unto thee in the burning lake beneath, I, your servant, present this offering. The clown with the inverted crosses around his eyes bellowed, his unnaturally baritone vocals echoing off of the walls of the dark room. No. Please. Just let me go. I won't tell anybody. Derek bawled as the clown then pulled out a dagger and a small black book. I just sat there, hidden under a pile of corpses, of kids who'd been sacrificed, watching in hopeless terror as they were preparing to do the same to my friend. I have to do something. Of course. I had no idea of what. I watched as the one in the middle poised the blade above Derek's right eye before continuing. I only ask of thee in return for the eternal youth and happiness for myself and my disciples. Praise Beliar. The other two chanted in unison. Beliar. My heart plummeted into my stomach as the realization became clear. The clown then opened the small book and began chanting in another language, in nomine Leviathan serpentum bestia ex abysso, as he cut into Derek's right eye, ripping away his eyelid and the rest of the skin around it. Derek's cries of pain were so shrill that I was forced to seal my eyes shut tight and cover my ears. I still hear his screams. I'll always hear his screams. When he was finished, the clown in the middle, the amazing Beliar, then poised the blade over his left eye and chanted in nomine Asmodeus, Prince Abene Feris, before then plunging the blade down above his left eye, slowly cutting away the skin around it like with the other. I couldn't just sit there and watch anymore. I thought that if I could somehow distract them long enough to let go, Derek might be able to run away. As I tried to formulate a plan, I saw the amazing Beliar proceed to insert the blade into Derek's mouth. Derek screamed out, please. No more. Shaking his head and staring pleadingly for mercy with his exposed, skinless eyes. I worked myself out from under the pile of bodies on top of me, unnoticed, as the amazing Beliar began dragging the blade across the right corner of his mouth, tearing it upward across his cheek and up to his right ear while chanting in nomine Satanas, et cecitet in Draco et Pater Infern. Let him go. You ducking bastards. I screamed, interrupting him before he could finish. Derek lolled his head over in my direction, fully exposing the mutilation of his face. El Linus. He croaked out weakly, his vocal cords strained from his screams. Run. but I was already charging headfirst into the clown on the left that was restraining his arms. Apparently having successfully caught him by surprise. I actually managed to shove the clown away from the altar and was even able to tackle him to the ground. My luck didn't last, however, as he quickly and easily threw me off of him, hurling me to the floor. Before I could try for another assault, however, the other clown grabbed me off of the floor and yanked me onto my feet, pinning my arms behind my back. I tried to struggle against him, but it was no use. His grip was like a gorilla. The more I struggled, the further back he pinned my arms, causing me to cry out in pain. "Ooh. It looks like we got us a wild one here. Happy Jack-O, old buddy," the fat-faced clown called to the other one that I'd tackled, who now had Derek restrained to the slab once again. The clown then forced me to the ground on my face before planting his boot firmly in my back and seizing my arms and yet again pinning them even harder, causing me to shriek even more in agony. "Why don't we see how loud he can scream? Happy Bob, make the little piggy squeal for mommy," Happy Jack-O suggested. Giggling hysterically, I looked up, craning my neck to lock eyes with Derek, still forced down to the slab. His eyes, though scarred and skinless, looked almost apologetic. That was when I felt the boot of Happy Bob raise up and slam down onto the middle of my back, using my arms to try and bend my upper torso backwards in an attempt to snap me in half. This caused me to scream harder than ever until the amazing Belier bellowed enough, prompting him to remove his boot from my back and release my arms. I just laid there, too sore to move. That's when the amazing Belier approached me and kneeled down, nudging my chin up with his finger to meet his sinister gaze. For a moment, he just stared at me, his soulless black eyes burning into mine. "PP, please just let us go," I weakly begged, my body still throbbing with pain. His black lips split into a menacing grin as he stroked my cheek. His grin then disappeared as he looked up at Happy Bob and said in a cold, deep tone, "Bring the boy to the altar." I felt him forcefully grab my arms and hoist me to my feet, guiding me over to the altar where I was once again staring into my friend's mutilated face. I then looked over to see that the amazing Belier now held a large sledgehammer in his hands. What are you doing?" I sputtered, my eyes going wide as fear drained the color from my face. He must have seen the terror in my eyes as he just smiled again and stroked my cheek with the left face of the hammer. Teasing me. "Do you care for this boy's life?" he asked in his deep voice, a sense of sick glee seeping through. A tear ran down my cheek as I stared into Derek's naked and exposed eyes. His smile grew as he moved the sledgehammer away from my face and looked down at Derek. I began trying to struggle again, but it was no use. My arms might as well have been caught in a bear trap. I watched him raise the sledgehammer above his head and swing it down with all of his strength on Derek's shoulder, flattening it and shattering the bones. "Stop it!" I screamed, tears filling my eyes. "Stop! Stop! Boo hoo hoo!" Happy Bob mocked, giggling hysterically. The hammer came down 3 more times onto Derek's chest and he began to cough up blood while convulsing. "You always were the best at whack-a-mole," Happy Jack-O cheered, bursting into his own giggling fit. He finally dropped the sledgehammer as Derek's body started to go limp. Derek! Derek!" I screamed through my tears. Oh. Somebody's not happy," Happy Bob quipped in a sing-song voice. I looked back to see him pucker his bottom lip and make whimpering sounds. "I have an idea," Happy Jack-O said eagerly. Like he was excited. He then walked into the doorway they came from and grabbed what looked like a tank of helium. The kind they'd use for birthday parties. "You know what I think'll turn the little piggy's frown upside down?" "Bobo." Giggling, Happy Bob replied. "What's that?" "I think he needs a balloon." He then looks at me and asks, "Would you like that, piggy? Would you like a balloon?" I just stared back at him, too confused and terrified of what he meant by balloon to say anything. That's when I felt the hand of Happy Bob grab my jaw and force it up and down like I was a puppet. Speaking in a fake higher-pitched voice, "I would love a balloon, Happy Jack-O." I watched as he then attached an air hose to the valve of the tank. Then, before I could even blink, I helplessly watched as the amazing Belier plunged the blade of the dagger into Derek's neck. "No!" I screamed, my vocal cords beginning to tear. I struggled harder than ever, but I still couldn't get out of the psycho clown's grasp. "We got an eager one," He's really excited for his special balloon. Happy Jacko taunted. Derek convulsed again and blood began gushing before his eyes rolled back and he went limp. You psycho ducks killed him. I tried to hang my head down so I wouldn't have to look anymore. But they weren't done with me yet. And I felt Happy Bob yank my head up by my hair. Don't you want to see your balloon? He said, giggling with excitement. Through my tears, I watched in horrified revulsion as Happy Jacko slipped the air hose into the gaping, bloody gash in Derek's throat and opened up the valve of the helium tank. Within seconds, I beheld the birth of the product of my worst nightmares to come as the skin of Derek's face began to expand, inflating to the point where the gash in his throat tore until his neck had completely ripped away from his shoulders. I couldn't even turn away. Happy Bob forced my head to stay in place to make sure I watched every goddamn second of the sickening act. I saw Derek's dead eyes bulge from their bloody sockets, almost sticking straight out. Happy Jacko then pulled out the air hose, patching up the gash to seal it off. And voila! Your very own special balloon. Happy Jacko exclaimed, jumping up and down with glee. He even tied a string to the severed spinal cord dangling from his severed neck, holding it out to me as his scarred, dismembered head just floated in the air like a ducking balloon. My body finally just went limp as the balloon just floated there, staring at me with two large white orbs rolled back and his shredded mouth smile. I just started retching, only resulting in dry heaves. What's wrong? Piggy? Don't like the balloon. I just looked back up at Happy Jacko, tears drenching my horrified face and croaked out WY. The next thing I knew, the amazing Belier, smiling that demon smile, stabbed the side of Derek's inflated head, causing an ear-splitting pop and the contents of his head to shower all over us. Oh. It popped. Happy Jacko teased, shrugging his shoulders before bursting into another fit of giggles. I couldn't help but scream when I saw that, amidst the gore covering me from head to toe, were loose scraps of his face sticking to me. Despite my hysterical state, however, I was able to seize a chance to escape when I threw my head straight back and bashed Happy Bob's nose. He immediately threw me to the floor and brought his hands up to his nose, which was now busted wide open and gushing blood. He let out a sharp, angry cry of pain and looked at me with a shocked expression. You hit me. His voice sounded like a child who was caught off guard, immediately morphing into a tone and expression of white-hot rage as he bellowed. You hit me. Now no longer holding the dementedly jovial facade. You little shit. He roared, lunging forward to grab me. In an instant, I rolled away, dodging Happy Bob's attempted seizure and scrambled back to my feet and ran for dear life to the open doorway. I didn't dare look back as I could hear the thundering footfalls in hot pursuit behind me. I ran through the door and slammed it shut behind me and, grabbing a few of the other nearby spare helium tanks, trying hard not to think of Derek as I did so, and propped them against the door to possibly hold it shut long enough for me to at least gain some distance. I heard the crash of the door being rammed from the other side. The tanks held firm for the first 3 assaults on the door before I noticed them starting to budge. They'll be through that door any moment, I realized after the tanks shifted more away from the door, allowing it to open to a small crack. Frantically, I started looking around the room I was currently in to find an exit, or at least some sort of equivalent to one. The area I was in now looked to be another hallway. This one, though, was orange and seemed to be round, the walls and ceiling curved outwards with doors similar to the ones I saw in the room. The 3 doors behind the Happy Jacko door all labeled with cartoon smiley faces. Which door is the? My question was cut off by a harsh banging on the door. I snapped back to see that the door had started to poke outwards and the hinges beginning to rip away from the wall. My eyes went wide and I could actually feel my head getting lighter and lighter with every panicked palpitation of my heart. Another series of bangs rocked the door, further stoving it outward. When I decided to try the door on my left, I ran over and urgently threw the door open, only to have to hold on to the inwardly curved frame to keep from falling into the pit of jagged nails jutting up from the floor below. I quickly threw myself back to regain my balance in the hallway and closed the door back. Another crash against the door knocked one of the hinges clean off of the frame, sending it flying off. I stayed focused on trying to find the exit. The next door I tried was in the middle of the right-hand wall. Throwing the door open, I was immediately blinded by a mounted strobe light at the far end of the room. I shielded my eyes and tried to back away when I felt the air around me being sucked away and into the room. because my body was still weak from the beating I took from the clowns. Coupled with how quickly the air was being devoured by the room, my vision slowly started to blur and vertigo began to overtake me. My legs began to give, forcing me to hold onto the doorframe to hold myself up. Despite the dizziness, I was still able to see clearly enough that the entrance door to the circular hallway had now fully been bashed off of its hinges. Happy Bob stood there in the exposed doorway, tightly gripping the sledgehammer. Covered in blood and brain tissue. Blood was also flowing from his nose, which now looked caved in. His eyes were wide and bloodshot and his teeth were clenched, with a distinct animalistic growl in his voice. He bellowed, "I'm gonna bash your little piggy head into duck and paste," as he charged towards me, his face twitching with every step. I saw him raise the sledgehammer above his head and, with an aggressive grunt, hurl it at me. I stumbled into the oxygen-devouring, seizure-inducing room like I was drunk, just narrowly dodging the projectile sledgehammer. Inside the room, I had to squint my eyes from the epileptic strobe light. I continued to stumble around the room, unable to clearly perceive anything as my disorientated vision continued to blur and my breathing became more and more heavy. Behind me, I was able to see Happy Bob retrieve the sledgehammer and stomp towards me, his breathing heavy and full of murderous rage. "If I faint, I'm done for," I told myself as I pushed myself forward. In the distance, I strained my vision enough to see a dark, rectangular shape underneath the strobe light. A door, just a little further, I told myself as dark clouds started creeping into the corners of my vision. I could hear the whistling of the sledgehammer chopping through the air before impacting on the walls and floor behind me. Chancing a look back, I could see that his movements were slow as well as balance failing and the swings of the hammer erratic. It hit me the vacuum must be affecting him too. I watched him stagger a bit as he slammed the hammer down before raising up for another sluggish swing as he continued towards me. Despite this, however, I had to keep moving because I couldn't afford to risk passing out before he did. I shambled forward towards the strobe light, keeping as much of my focus on the door underneath it as was possible for me as I felt the room around starting to spin. I managed to make it 3/4 of the way there before my knees finally buckled, giving out from under me, and I collapsed to the floor on my hands and knees. I heard and felt a resounding thud resonate through the ground beneath me, and I looked back to see, despite my deleted vision, that Happy Bob had dropped the sledgehammer and was now wobbling forward with his arms outstretched to choke out what little bit of life I was clinging to. Almost there, have to keep moving. My thoughts were becoming cloudier by the second. Using every ounce of reserve strength and then some, I managed to push onwards to the door that was almost gone from my fading vision. Crawling on my hands and knees. Behind me, still shambling forward, Happy Bob growled out, his words slurred, "I'm gonna rip your guts out," before his legs also failed him and he too fell to the ground. My arms began to quiver now just as my legs had, and I began wheezing and gasping for breath like a fish being held out of the water. Just before I could give in to the darkness, however, my hand felt the smooth surface of a door in front of me and I felt up for the knob, grabbing and turning it to open. The very last of my energy was expended in crawling weakly out of the room and closing the door behind me. Immediately, I fell back against the door, completely spent as, all at once, fresh oxygen flooded my starving lungs. The sudden influx of fresh air caused to cough and wheeze, before finally returning to normal. After several relieving deep breaths, my vision also began to regain composure as I was able to make out my current environment to be the hallway we first came into. "Linus." I lolled my head over to where the voice came from. It was Liza. "I've been waiting here for 30 minutes. She stopped dead in her tracks and frowned. "What's all over you?" I didn't know. I couldn't answer. The horrific image of Derek, his inflated dismembered head with his mutilated face, stabbed itself back into my mind as I buried my face into my viscera-caked palms and started crying. "Are you okay? What happened? And where's Derek?" It was then that I just completely broke, dropping my hands from my face and going into a full-on meltdown. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," I blubbered out, not knowing what else to say. "This isn't funny. Where's my brother?" Liza demanded, her voice taking on a tone of anxious agitation. They, was all I was able to say. "You know what? Forget it, I'm calling Mom and Dad. This isn't cool." I just sat there crying as I watched her storm out of the entrance. unable to bring myself to tell her that she was never going to find her brother. At least not alive. Or even in one piece. What happened immediately after felt surreal. Like I was barely aware of it half the time. I remember Liza returning with her folks. As well as the police. They immediately suspected the worst when they entered and saw me covered in blood. It wasn't long before they had backup arrive and began searching the place for Derek. They tried questioning me. And I did my best to tell them what I saw. And experienced. I couldn't tell you whether or not they believed me. Not that it really mattered in the end. After they decided not to question me further. They escorted me to my house where they filled my parents in on Derek's disappearance. I remember the look of panic on Ma's face when she saw me stained in blood. I also remember that she asked me if I was okay. Only for me to just break down again. Fortunately, neither she nor Dad pressed for further details that night. I found out a few days later that the police searched the area for 5 hours. After they took me home before giving up the search for the night. And in another 3 months they'd give up the search parties entirely and declare him as a missing person. I also heard that. During their searches, Happy World was completely abandoned, like nobody or nothing was ever there to begin with, just like Derek said. I wish this was where my story ended. I wish that that was the last I ever saw of Happy World or those satanic psycho clowns. But unfortunately, it wasn't. And it wasn't. The last time I'd watch people I loved and cared about fall victim to them. All of that will have to be a story for another time. Though, I just can't bring myself to type out anymore right now. Maybe now though. I can possibly feel safe sleeping at least a little bit tonight if what the shrinks say is true.